Pavlova. Pavlova is both a Christmas dessert and a summer dessert. And how that works is that it's Australian and they do both there at the same time. If you've never had it before, imagine like if a meringue were a cake and instead of being crunchy all the way through, you have like a crispy meringue shell and a gooey marshmallowy interior, and then it's just covered with whipped cream and fruit. It's super fresh, it's super delicious. Even though it might be just a little bit challenging to make, it's something that you can make ahead and then top off right when you need it. The reason why I decided to do this for like my holiday themed dessert episode is because a lot of people will be doing cakes and pies and heavy desserts, and this thing is kind of like just something unexpected and light, but still rich and delicious. For my pavlova, we're gonna try to incorporate some of the warmer Christmassy notes that we know and associate with our wintertime, instead of the normal summery mix of berries and cream. Berries and cream, berries and cream. So today we're gonna do mulled wine poached pears and persimmons poached in orange juice and rye. If you don't drink alcohol, you can leave out the rye, or this is one of the only times I would ever recommend you use a non-alcoholic red wine. This stuff just pretty much tastes like adolescent grape juice, and for the sake of mulling in cooking, it actually works out pretty well. So here we go, my poached pear and persimmon pavlova. Let's get started. Now, whether you're making meringue, pavlova, or whatever, it is really important that when you're separating your egg yolks from your egg whites, not to get any fat, which is what is in yolk. Because the more that you beat them, the fat from the egg yolks prevent the egg whites from making those stiff peaks that we want. Meaning that it's really important to make sure that your equipment is clean, because any residual oil or soap can really just fuck up your egg whites. So make sure you're working with clean equipment as well as properly separating your eggs. So the easiest way for me to do it, I'll just do a nice gentle crack here and then kind of like vertically open it and pull apart the egg this way. The whites just kind of falls while the yolk is still in the cup. After that, you just kind of pour it all in through your fingers and let the whites separate. Maybe give it a little bit of a back and forth here so that any of the residual white separates from the yolk, and then you can just like so. If you're not very experienced in doing this, I do suggest doing it in a separate bowl first and then putting your components into their own bowls, because it is very tragic when you're doing your very last one like this and then some yolk falls in and you ruin the whole thing. So this way is probably the best. Another reason why I really like making this during Christmas time is because there are tons of recipes that call for the use of egg yolks in Christmas baking and desserts or eggnog or whatnot. So these generally don't go to waste, but we're not using them for this one. So I'm gonna set this aside. Because we are baking, and baking is awful, we have to measure out all of our ingredients, and I find it easier just to like measure everything in grams. So using a scale, we will measure out 250 grams of egg whites. If I do this properly, I don't have to blame myself. All right, that's good. 250 grams of egg whites. 370 grams of caster sugar or super fine sugar. Basically what this is it's regular sugar that has been like ground to a much finer consistency. This is not powdered sugar. Powdered sugar has some cornstarch in it, I think, to stop it from caking, so you definitely don't want to use that. You want to use 100% caster or super fine sugar because it absorbs more cleanly when you're mixing it in with wet ingredients. It is essential for things like meringues and macarons. So 370 grams of superfine sugar. If you do not have any caster sugar on hand and you have regular granulated sugar, you can blend it in a blender or a food processor or even some spice grinders and just make your own. Now that we've got our egg and sugar measured out, slowly whisk the eggs in the mixer. Is this working? There we go. It's a very old machine. Now, you might be tempted to just like let her rip and just go through this at a level 10 setting. Right now it's at like 4 or 5, and it's about as fast as you should be whipping your eggs. You want to give your egg whites as much time to incorporate as much air as you can gradually, and doing it too quickly messes with the texture of your meringue. Depending on like how hot or cold your kitchen is, this might take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. So at this time, we're just at the cusp of between a loose white and soft peaks. So you can tell right here that as it's going, it's starting to take just a little bit of shape. It's starting to have like just a tiny little bit of structure. And once we're at the soft peak stage, that's when we start to incorporate our sugar by the spoonful. So I would say just about like maybe a minute after this point, and you'll be ready. Yeah, little bit of a dip and a little bit of a droopy peak. So as we go here, we add bit by bit. We can turn this down even slower. Add in our sugar as we go. Let it incorporate and mix before adding in more. You'll see the mixture get more smooth as you go, and it'll start to get glossier as the sugar incorporates the egg whites. It'll start to take almost like a marshmallowy consistency, which is what you want. Maybe once or twice during this whole process, you might want to push down the sides to make sure that you get all the granulated sugar in. This process should take you about 10 to 15 minutes, but if it takes longer, like even up to like 30 minutes for the sugar to completely dissolve, that's fine. It really just depends on a mix of your temperature, your egg whites, and the fineness of your sugar, but it should not be grainy whatsoever. All the sugar should be incorporated and dissolved. Once the sugar is almost completely dissolved, like about 5 minutes before it's done, you want to add in both your cream of tartar and your cornstarch. The acid in the cream of tartar will help stabilize the proteins of the egg whites, while the cornstarch allows it to maintain its structure more easily. It is a teaspoon of cream of tartar and 1.5 tablespoons of cornstarch. All right, so just stick that right in. And then let that go for 5 minutes. What you should have is a very nice, very smooth, very gooey base in which to make your pavlova. Almost think of this as like a structural batter made out of marshmallow goo. It is very hard not to put my face in this. On a non-stick liner or a sheet of parchment paper, which you can help stick to your tray just by putting some on the bottom here. There you go. Unlike anything else that involves meringues or even like macaron, like those like French almond flour biscuits that people love, is that mistakes will happen and maybe your pavlova will crack or maybe it'll split or whatever. That is fine, that is normal. We're not professional pastry chefs here, and that's what the whipped cream is for. Basically, whatever happens to this that makes it a less than perfect pavlova base, you're gonna hide under whipped cream and fruit anyway. Don't take it too seriously. Have fun with this, because this is actually like a really fun and glorious dessert to make. So I like to do it maybe a few inches tall for drama. You do want a little bit of a ridge at the top because you want to be able to hold all the whipped cream and all the fruit in there. So do create a little bit of a crevice, almost like a nest, or since it's like, you know, Christmas, a wreath, if you will. So at this point, you want to put this in with your oven preheated to 275 degrees. And as soon as it is in there, reduce it to 212. Set a timer for 5 minutes. No! At this point, you want to bake it between 1 to 1.5 hours. And it's really important not to open your oven about like 10 minutes before you're about to take it out, just to check to see if it has developed that nice little like crust on the outside. Now it's really important here. Letting it cool down slowly is how you prevent it from cracking and splitting. If you don't really care about that, you can bring it out and let it cool on your rack and, you know, just leave it. But if you want to give your Pavlova its best chance at coming out nice and perfect, then what you should actually do is after about an hour and 20 minutes or so, just turn off your oven and let it cool overnight so that it can really gradually and slowly cool, giving it time to dry very, very slowly and come out perfect. With our Pavlova in the oven, let's focus on the fruit. I like to use the Bosc pear because it's kind of soft and it takes to like sauces and poaching really, really well. And persimmons, these are grown in California and they're very widely available during the wintertime. And I like poaching these in like brandy or rye. We have rye. I like poaching these in rye. So when making mulled wine, the wine that I like to use is like a full-bodied red, something a little on the drier side. So anywhere between a Cab to maybe a Shiraz or a Malbec. In this case, I've got a Malbec. And we're just going to dump that in. Like so. Traditionally, mulling spices consists of cinnamon, star anise, clove, maybe some allspice. I'm gonna add a little bit of cardamom and black pepper to mine just to brighten it up a little bit because this is for a dessert. You can use a tea strainer or a cheesecloth to just keep like the wine bit separate because we're gonna reduce this as well and then turn this into kind of like a drizzle to put on top of everything. Apart from spices, other things you might want to add to your mulled wine include maybe some orange liqueur and some brandy, or I just happen to have cognac here, so I'm going to use cognac. And then to the wine, you will add anywhere between 2 to 4 tablespoons of sugar to start. Before I add in my pears, which I have pre-peeled here, I'm gonna try a little something. I've also peeled my persimmons, and I'm going to add these to the wine itself just to give like everything some more of that flavor. I love the skins of fruit and the flavor that they have in there. Bring this to a soft simmer before adding in your pears. Before we poach the persimmons, we're just gonna go ahead and slice them first. Peel and then remove the tops. These are a little bit slippery, and by a little bit slippery, I mean like they're very slippery. So just be careful when cutting them. All right, with the mulled wine simmering, we can add in our pears, and we want to add them in whole because as they absorb all the redness of the wine, they like develop a nice little like gradient color as you cut them open or after you cut them open, which means you'll have to move them around a little bit as you go so that they can absorb the color more evenly. Now for the persimmons, it's pretty much the same situation with different juice and different liqueur. I'm going to do just a more simpler version here with allspice, cloves, oops, there we go, cinnamon, black pepper. To this you'll add a quart of orange juice and 2 shots of rye, or that. And then add your persimmons in right away and then bring it to a simmer. After your persimmons have poached nicely, just bring them out and separate them from the liquid. You can discard this liquid after you are done with it. And then you can do the same when removing the poached pears. Now do not discard the mulled wine because we are going to strain this, add more sugar to it, and then do a red wine reduction. Probably the easiest way to do this is just to discard the solids. Before adding in any more sugar, just do a little taste to see how much more it needs before reducing. While the Pavlova reduces, we can cut into some of our pears. Because everything else is so flavorful, I suggest just keeping the cream simple and plain as is, especially considering the fact that, like, you know, the pavlova itself is just a whole bunch of egg whites and sugar. So just whip the cream up to stiff peaks. Should only take a couple of minutes. If you want to reduce the red wine faster than I was in the saucepan, just a little bit in a frying pan just so everything can evaporate more quickly, will get you a really nice red wine syrup. Drama, grace style. The inside of this should be just ooey gooey marshmallowy, and the outside of this is nice and crisp and like of a meringue consistency. It's that like chalky sweet that you get from the meringue cookies that I love. The minute that whipped cream and fruit and all of the stuff that you put on top of it, the minute that something wet touches this thing, you're going against the clock. You gotta serve it pretty much right away. So if you're gonna bring this to a party or cook this thing the day before a really big Christmas dinner or something, do this part first, keep it in a box, keep it in an airtight box, and then do everything else, and then assemble right before it's time to serve. First thing we're gonna do is try to transfer this onto a serving plate. Do I have a serving plate big enough to? Will this work? I think so. It's one of those things, it's like a macaron where it's like you did all this work on the front end and you don't know whether or not it worked out until it's done, and you had to like wait all this time. No amount of times that you can do that this is not satisfying. So now we add in our whipped cream, and we're gonna do these. So I can hear like the pavlova itself like kind of start to take in the moisture and stuff already. So like I said, as soon as it is done, when it's ready, it's ready. You're practically serving this table side. There we go. So you see out here, it's got a gooey center, and it has that like crispy meringue outer shell. It's super sweet, so you're gonna need to eat it with all the tart fruit. But definitely a different kind of pavlova for Christmas. It's deep, it's rich, and it's still tart. I'd say this works. There you have it, pavlova. Or I should say, like, there you have it, like Midwest Christmas pavlova.